Greetings, fair listeners, and thank you for joining me once again as we celebrate stories and storytelling in all their forms and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I am the Tale Collector and your host, Erica Adams. As it turned out, my search for a buyable copy of this older children's novel back in the early 2000s was just as memorable as the novel itself. My first attempt led me a few miles away to where a man was selling vast amounts of books from his huge stately house. He didn't have the book I was looking for, but that didn't make wandering and exploring the rooms of his beautiful home-turned-bookstore any less cool or exciting. It was the first and last time I went, and once in a while I find myself wishing I had taken advantage of the opportunity more. In any case, the other first this book provided was that it gave me a reason to seriously consider internet shopping. With the help of my parents, it was then that I created my Amazon account and from there, made my very first online purchase. In retrospect, I don't feel that the way these adventures made my owning and reading of this book all the more enriching is too unlike the life journey of Donn Kushner's protagonist, namely, a book dragon. First published in 1987 and recommended for readers 8 and up. One of the last surviving dragons of the Middle Ages, Nonsuch takes the ways of his kind very seriously, just as his stern but loving grandmother raised him to do. However, she makes it very clear to him that he will never be a true and proper dragon unless he finds himself a treasure to guard. When his grandmother at last leaves him, and after inadvertently gaining the strange ability to alter his size according to his food intake, Nonsuch sets off in search of his own personal treasure. And find it he does, in the form of a beautiful illuminated manuscript, lovingly crafted by a wise and devoted monk. But then, a theft gone awry traps the now insect-sized dragon within the pages of his book for 600 years, at which time both he and it are transported to a small East Coast bookshop in the 1990s. Hiding within the nooks and crannies of the bookshelves, Nonsuch never reveals himself to the humans of this new place and time. But in spite of himself, he does take an instant liking to the shop's kindly owner, Mr. Gottlieb, especially upon seeing the care and respect with which the man treats the dragon's treasure. And so, when the sleazy and conniving real estate agent, Mr. Abercrombie, threatens the future of the shop, Nonsuch takes it upon himself to also protect Mr. Gottlieb, his loved ones, and all of his beloved books, the way that only a dragon can. The overall tone of this book strikes me as very pleasant and introspective. While I'm not sure that traditional story labels like coming of age or self-discovery would quite effectively describe this, I think it still may prompt readers to reflect on how their past experiences have shaped who they become. One of the more amusing aspects of this story is that many of the animal characters, especially Nonsuch's grandmother, remark, or in some cases rant, on other creatures or life in general almost the same way that many people do today regarding dysfunctional family members or politics. Like many a no-nonsense matriarch, the grandmother is the type who believes that she knows what's what about the world, and woe betide the one who dares suggest otherwise. And yet I could never bring myself to dislike her. Though she often talks like a grouchy old bat, we see through Nonsuch that she is indeed very knowledgeable and only wants to bring her grandson up right. Plus, her curt words actually make a lot of sense more often than not. Pages 4 through 6. And then her mind, which sometimes could not remember events of the same day, took a great leap backwards. In the beginning, his grandmother told Nonsuch, dragons had chosen to separate themselves from the dinosaurs, to whom they were distantly related, except for being so much more intelligent. They were so stupid, the grandmother said, wagging her head with a sour, disapproving tone, as if she were speaking of creatures alive now, not those dead for millions of years. No true dragon could ever tolerate such stupidity. But grandmother, Nonsuch said respectfully, for he knew she didn't like to be contradicted. Some of our ancestors have done foolish things. You've said so yourself. He remembered her past stories. Most of the time, he added. His grandmother reared back her head and almost rose up on her legs. Her dim eyes glowed fiercely. Foolish? Yes. Improvident? More often than not. Never counted the cost. At times, frankly, insane, but not stupid. Any true dragon could always tally up the cost of its actions, could always foretell if it was heading for disaster if it chose. But there are more important choices. Then, her eyes sending out pulses of dull light, as pride and sorrow swelled within her, his grandmother told of the valiant and fortunate Shatswak, who, from high above the Caucasus Mountains, spotted a vein of pure gold exposed by a sudden geological fault. Obedient to the great law of all dragons, guard your treasure, Shatswak settled down on the shining surface, covering it with his wide wings and long tail, hardly leaving it even to search for food. Finally, when he was so weak that he could no longer fly, he was set upon by scores of knights with two-handed swords and hundreds of bushy-bearded peasants with long axes. He gave a good account of himself before his enemies hacked him to pieces, and his green blood mingled with theirs. But the dragon's blood burned down into the gold itself, giving it a magnificent blue-green sheen, the dragon gold from which the crowns of all the Tsars of Russia were fashioned. Yes, guard your treasure, the grandmother repeated. A dragon without a treasure is nothing but an ugly flying reptile, with even less dignity than a salamander. Then, her nostrils pinched together, she added, with less dignity than a turtle, and with no more than a toad. Nonsuch's grandmother had many sayings like this, which she brought out at more or less appropriate times. Never kill anything you won't eat, she would say, adding in a milder tone, why waste the energy? Or, be dauntless, valiant, tragic, whatever you like, but don't be stupid. Or, if you must fight, find a worthy foe, often adding with a shake of the head, if you're lucky enough to come across one these days. But usually, even if she had said it before, she would end her list of precepts with, always guard your treasure. Nonsuch, for his part, takes life in stride, possessing a healthy curiosity but without ever forgetting his roots. Though determined to follow his nature as well as his grandmother's words, he does so in his own way, going so far as to shrink himself to the size of smaller creatures. While a logical series of events leads to him discovering this ability, how he actually acquires it is only hinted at and never fully explained. Nevertheless, it grants Nonsuch a view of life that he has never seen before. This is doubly true regarding humans and their creation of books. It is not only the joy of the written word where Kushner draws our attention. Through Nonsuch's eyes, young readers get a glimpse of the beauty of illuminated manuscripts, on each page of which both words and pictures are painstakingly crafted to create a divine masterpiece of color and detail, almost as real as the real thing. Page 69. But the images on the top page in the binder and on the unfinished page drew Nonsuch's attention more closely. The middle part of each page was covered with black letters. In the wide margins around the text were more familiar shapes. A vine started in the lower right-hand corner and spread all around the page, its branches meeting again at the upper left-hand corner. Small tendrils of the vine ran right into the text, marking certain letters with tiny red and gold flowers. Away from the text, the vine became alive with larger flowers in fantastic shapes and colors. Here and there, faces peered out of the vine. Unicorns, gnomes, mischievous monkeys, solemn toads. From one leaf, a tiny bat hung, head down. In the blank spaces away from the vine, bright butterflies fluttered, looking as if in a moment they would fly away from the pages. Adding to the aesthetic, pictures of a similar nature are peppered throughout the novel, some larger ones bordering the pages that begin each chapter, while smaller ones are placed above or in between some of the paragraphs. One of my favorites is the Robin Hood figure on the inside of page 18, shooting an arrow toward the upper left-hand corner into the corresponding number, which flies backward in pieces. On that note, one thing in particular that struck me is how easy it was for me to forget that this is a book aimed at children because of its surprisingly quiet atmosphere. Though there are some lightly amusing bits certainly, like the almost casual manner in which the narrator chronicles Nonsuch's attacks on cats and dogs that mistake him for prey, or when the grandmother matter-of-factly describes rearranging the chemistry of the stars in the sky as if it were comparable to clearing off a kitchen table, or, without giving away any spoilers, the oddly practical way in which Nonsuch finally gets rid of Abercrombie. But I think this aforementioned atmosphere boils down to the main character's pragmatism. There were some points when I found myself thinking of the movie Forrest Gump. A weird comparison, I know, but please hear me out. Like Gump, during his entrapment within his manuscript, Nonsuch often finds himself in the midst of prominent events in history, such as the Black Death, the Great Fire of London, and the War of the Roses. Such events most remember and revere, while the more down-to-earth character may acknowledge it, but then move on with no real attachment or emotion. But that's not to say that Nonsuch doesn't feel nostalgic every now and then. The dragons of this story have neither true love nor hate for humans, generally preferring to avoid them altogether, unless of course they present themselves as a convenient meal. Nonsuch is no noble defender trying to justify the whims of humans in spite of their evil ways. He reminisces and wonders a bit when presented with the somewhat existential question of why he chooses to live among the humans in the bookshop. But in the end, rather than dwell on it, he satisfies himself by deciding that it makes him happy, a simple and sensible answer that best suits his nature and his personal interests. Pages 172 to 73. In the following days, Nonsuch hardly left the bookshop. This was not only on account of his own special treasure, the Book of Hours. From time to time he crawled into the cupboard in Mr. Gottlieb's study to look at it, for the bookseller was too worried to take it out. But mostly, Nonsuch realized, he spent his time watching over the other books in the shop. Why was he so concerned with these books? They didn't even stay in the shop. They were sold, people took them away, often with eager faces, and sometimes brought others to take their place. It was like the old days in the Abbey of Oddfields, he finally realized, when he had set himself to guard the crops which, he knew, would be harvested and eaten and replaced with fresh plantings. These books were the crops of the bookshop, Nonsuch thought. Curiously, this idea pleased him. My friends have good crops, he said to himself. Friends! How he had come to be involved in the ways of humans. Sometimes he wondered if his grandmother would approve. Then he thought, this must be an aspect of human life that even she had never known. If we must be involved with humans, he told her in his mind, these are the kind of humans we should choose. Besides providing a unique take on the concept of a dragon guarding a valuable treasure from thieves or invaders, a book dragon also highlights the beauty of books, their creation as well as their use, both ancient and modern, without being obvious or preachy about it, and encouraging readers to enjoy and share the activity for its own sake. This is the kind of novel that's best read in the evening, in a big comfy recliner, with a nice cup of tea or hot chocolate on hand. Something to make you think about your past fondly, and use those memories to move forward, but at your own relaxed pace. However, you may want to consider leaving the book out when you're done for the night. There might be another bookworm nearby, hiding just out of sight, wanting to take a peek too. You never know. Gather round next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you.